So super excited to have this really diverse, cognitively diverse panel as well. Here, we were expecting a lot more people, and there was some miscommunication in the marketing, but we are still going to have a great time. We were excited that you all are here. It's going to be a very interactive experience, especially since it's a smaller group. So we'll be, also asking you guys questions, and we'll love to hear y'all's feedback too as well as we progress. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into these questions that we actually have for you all. So if you can pull out your phones really quick, what you'll do in panelists, yeah, let's do it too. Let's go ahead and do it since we need more data.
You don't have my phone. That's okay.
All right, so what we're gonna do is you're gonna scan this, and then you're gonna type in DSW. And the first question that should show up whenever you scan this is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how knowledgeable are you on the subject of ESG? So you're gonna just select between 1 and 10.
That's a big question.
You said what?
That's a big question.
It is a big question. So how knowledgeable? You're just gonna be.
Yeah, go to the next slide. Yeah. It should
Okay,
update
now it'll say, now it should pull up.
Just making sure.
So you guys can go ahead and answer that.
I'm knowledgeable. That's a lot of stars.
That is 1 through 10.
I was gonna count it, but I'll take your word for it.
This is a safe place to be honest, especially since we're even smaller.
All right, has anybody not finished that? Raise your hand if you've not finished it. Okay, next.
Oh. A lot of people at 6. Interesting.
Nice.
Overall, we should run 5.
Right. So overall, we're about
Great.
5.5 in the room. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's go. Next question. All right, what would you like to learn more about? Environment, social, or governance? This is not a trick question, but you can only select one.
This is up to you guys.
You can go ahead with the next. So we'll start to show the populace.
All right, environment,
Environment.
governance, and then social.
Oh.
Oh, governance just, I don't know, who just answered?
Sway the room in here. All right, next question. We're at 45%, so we'll start with environment. Nice. What's more important to you within your organization, purpose or profit? Dang, this room is not big enough for you, to be honest.
I know.
Because I know there's some profits in here. It's okay, though. It's okay. There we go.
Oh, profit's growing. Awesome.
Love it.
Ooh.
Oh.
That's okay. That's okay.
We had to switch up. We had to switch up here.
Someone can sway the room.
Still trying to get the watch.
All right, so we'll start with an environment question. If you want to
Yes,
kick us
we
off,
will.
Gina. This is going to be for the panelists. Panelists, please feel free to jump in whenever you would like, if something you feel comfortable with. But up here on the screen, you'll see it kind of divided, what environmental focuses on, what social's, responsibility is, and then the responsibility of the organization, which is governance, essentially, and how you run your organization. So, kick us off with the environment question.
Yes, absolutely. And then just so the audience is aware, we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you are thinking about those questions, go ahead and write them down so you don't forget towards the end, and then we'll come back and answer those. All right, so this is for any of the fabulous panelists to answer. What are pros and cons of nuclear energy?
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a big question. I see wheels turning. And Adriana is definitely very, I would say, educated in this space, so I'm sure she'll be
I
answering a
assume
lot.
somebody else would have prepared for this. I'm really not an expert on nuclear energy. I know some general information, so if somebody else has more information, do jump in. But from just being in the space, the environmental space, the positives are that it's considered a clean energy, fairly clean compared to fossil fuels, compared to digging in the ground for oil or fracking for gas. It doesn't release as much carbon dioxide and other like methane and other very toxic chemicals. It generates a good amount of energy. I think it's more efficient energy being generated, meaning like when we extract fossil fuel, a lot of it hear about nuclear disasters, and that's very scary. And of course, if we do have a nuclear disaster, nobody is spared. We know of Chernobyl, the Fukushima plant in Japan that was damaged during the tsunami there. So there are a lot of there are ways that a nuclear factor generating facility can go wrong. With that said, my understanding is a lot of countries in the world, Europe and some other places, actually do rely a lot on nuclear. So it's not an unproven technology. Yes, accidents happen, and but there are mitigations and there are ways to ensure that those are somewhat controlled. I mean, at the end of the day, we haven't had, like 20 Chernobyls, although one is enough. But yeah, nuclear is still contentious because of how dangerous it is when it goes wrong.
Totally.
You
Yeah.
sounded pretty well-rounded.
Yeah, I was about to say the same
I'm not an
thing.
expert, but here are some experts.
She's very
Let me
humble.
just school everyone here.
I watched the Chernobyl show on HBO. I highly recommend it.
I just think it's fascinating with the developing countries like India and China, that when you look at nuclear energy, the fossil fuels are not a renewable source. Like once
Right.
they're used, they're done. Where nuclear fuel is a renewable source that will continue to go even longer than you want it to. But I think it is something as we continue to the third world countries start to modernize and get technology and get vehicles and get all of that we have to have some additional fuel sources. It's just not sustainable without having another source.
Sure.
I almost look at like solar panels. You still have to stay on the grid in order for it to still operate, but there's a small benefactor that comes with having them. So I think when you look at the transition of nuclear energy to fossil fuel energy, it's almost the same way as how we're trying to conserve, especially with our Texas grids after the snowstorms. You have to start finding alternative resources, but you have to be able to mitigate what you currently have in-house and make sure that you're distributing that out in portions and in rations, which for us, we're so heavily consumed. It's hard for us to save and salvage. So I think you kind of have to have both in order to continue to prosper and keep, like you said, as countries continue to develop, that means more resources are going to be needed to make sure that we're servicing the entire world. Well, you kind of have to monitor the usage of it all, but it has to be like a one unified collective agreement amongst all people to buy into at least exploring those alternatives. But it's like Ms. Cowell mentioned, it is risk versus rewards, and you kind of have to pick your poisons.
I'll jump in a little bit too. I think Adriana nailed it. I think everyone here had really good responses to that, but I do think, unfortunately, a lot of the sensationalism around nuclear energy is one of the downsides to it being a more supported form of energy for the country and for the world. It is the cleanest form of energy that we can produce currently. It is a true and tested technology that we do have. By the way, I'm not an expert in nuclear of any kind. I was a military guy, flew F-18s, then I was in finance for a bit and I run a company.
You say you did what in the military?
Flew F-18s.
Wow.
So, but no nuclear weapons on those. So I don't have any. I'm not a submariner. I didn't operate, but we do. When we fly in the carrier, we operate very in close proximity to the nuclear reactors that power those things. And so, the country does have expertise. We have demonstrated. I mean, if it can work inside of an aircraft carrier, roaming the oceans with F-18s landing right above it, I think it's probably a little bit more resilient than journalism or maybe those extreme events probably indicate. One thing too, not to downplay anything around 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, Fukushima, but if you look at closely the data around the Fukushima episode, the overwhelming majority of the devastation was caused by the tsunami itself, not anything directly tied to the nuclear facility. So if you look closely at that historically, I mean, it might make people a little bit more comfortable and agreeable around that. And a couple other just data points that if people are interested in looking into this, again, I'm not an expert by any means, but there's been a lot of developments around, I think just recently, the small modular reactors, so smaller, more easily able to be contained and maybe buried closer to geographical locations where the energy would be used. There's a lot of good, positive findings around that. And then also, the old way of doing this sort of work around with the atmospheric pressures required to operate the facilities, there are now versions of the technology under development that can operate at 1 atmospheric pressure. And so I think there's a lot of innovation taking place right now with nuclear fusion as opposed to fission and some others that I think there's a lot of possibility here. And if we're being intellectually honest, I think nuclear energy is one of the ways that we can truly become, you know, a clean, carbon-free energy user in the world.
Love that answer.
Yes, yes, sir.
I was gonna ask, do you guys have any idea what kind of a difference, if there is one, between nuclear for energy and then as a weapon? I mean, from the standpoint of, like, you know, you were saying before about other countries developing energy. Is that a start to a weapon, or if you have energy, then doing a weapon is totally different? Do you follow my question?
Yeah, I think, you know, my experience is that in energy, they contain the toxic side of nuclear energy, and in a weapon, they expose the toxic side of it. So, you know, I think it's the waste from the energy that they use to build bombs and stuff with.
Yeah.
My limited understanding, just by being in the military, understanding the use and, you know, the operational strategic deployment of weapons, the type of nuclear work that is done to create a weapon is different from typically the enrichment process, the types of things that you're doing. And I think, without betraying anything I'm not supposed to share, I think our intelligence agencies can pick up on that relatively clearly, like if someone is using it for the right purpose or not. But there is risk there, right? Because underlying knowledge base and the ability to do those sorts of things and have access to uranium and other materials, that there's some commonality there. So there's a risk.
Lovely
Yeah.
answers. While we're on environment, what is going green? It's a twofold question, right? So what is going green? And then we all know what gets measured gets done. How would you measure if a company is green or not?
I mean,
But first,
I'll,
what is
I'll, I'll
going
jump
green?
in because I think I'm
Yeah.
probably in the most wasteful industry here in the hospitality industry. So we run hotels, and you think about a hotel, and you know, I would use the example, if you have a 200-room hotel and you go into a guest room and you think of the amount of plastic that's in that room, just the single-use plastic. So there's the shampoo, the conditioner, the soap, the lotion, usually a couple bottles of water. So let's conservatively say 5 pieces of plastic, right? So 200-room hotel, that's 1,000 pieces of plastic a day, just from the rooms. So 365,000 pieces of plastic that in 1 year would fill this entire room probably 6 times.
It's crazy.
And, you know, it's going to be here for 300 to 400 years. So I don't think that there's a silver bullet to say if a company's green. I think it's about doing what you can. And so, you know, my former company, their entire foundation was based on sustainability. So bringing those ideas to a new company and being able to say, like, okay, how about if we put water stations in so we don't have to have bottled water? Right, and how about if we have refillable, you know, amenities, you know, great amenities still, but refillable so that we don't have all the plastic bottles. Something not simple in a company my size now, we have 8 hotels. You're talking about 2.4 million pieces of plastic a year just from our 8 little hotels.
It's crazy.
You know, so I don't think there's a silver bullet with sustainability. I mean, I think there's some metrics that companies can use to measure it, but I think it's just really about thinking, how can we do this smarter, right? What can we do to do it smarter? And I mean, little things just personally, because I think it's also a personal connection of like, I came in a generation when it was like, when we went from paper bags to plastic, and it was like, use plastic, it's better. You know, and it's like, okay, it is more, but it's going to be here for 300 or 400 years. So even things of going to the grocery store of like, listen, we can grow another tree, I can't get rid of the plastic.
Right.
And something, just those simple choices that you can make in your life of getting a water bottle versus buying bottled water, you know, those simple things that you can do. So I don't know, there's all kinds of metrics that you can have to measure, but I think it's just starting with do all the good you can, right? We're not gonna be perfect, or, you know, I still will occasionally have a bottle of water. The difference is that I can't do it and not think about it now,
Yeah, right.
right? I don't always do it, but I can't do it and not think like, man, I'm really gonna enjoy this water.
Right.
The Dasani looks amazing over there, you know, but I just can't do it and not think about the ramifications.
Yeah.
And people talk about recycled plastic. It's good, but there is no good plastic. Because unless you're gonna recycle it for 400 years, until it finally degrades, then it doesn't, so you get 2 uses out of it instead of one.
Right, yeah.
Sorry, I love what Dan said. And it's really, really up my alley with, reducing waste, in particular plastic. So agreed with everything Dan said, and I think you put it, very succinctly, but also in a very, real life format. What I was gonna say is this term of going green is more of a buzzword, right? Even sustainability is thrown around very much. What I would piggyback on what Dan said is do all the good you can. So each business is different, each industry is different. But I would say that for businesses that just want to go green as a marketing gimmick, it's not gonna work. It's gonna sound hollow and fake to consumers, if not immediately, but eventually for sure. What I would advocate for is businesses that really can build it into their DNA, make it part of their mission, their operation, and it doesn't mean, like Dan said, that overnight you become, the stellar company that doesn't have any waste or anything like that, but that you have that path in front of you, and that's your North Star, and pick what's relevant in your business. So to Dan's comment, in the hotel business, there's a lot of these wasted single-use toiletry bottles. Implementing water fountains and bigger, this refillable toiletries. That's a great step. Like, do that if that's your business. I mean, if you're in an industry that's very energy intensive, let's say a telecommunication industry where you're providing Wi-Fi and things like that, look at green power. Can you source your power from wind energy and renewables instead of fossil fuel? If you're a manufacturing company and it makes things, look at your supply chain, right? That's really important. Look at your packaging. So it's a journey, just like for an individual. And to Dan's point, it's one of those things where once you learn it, you can't unlearn it, and then you make small steps in your personal journey and in your business journey to implement better and better practices. But I will say for sure that if you're doing it just for a marketing gimmick, consumers will call you out on greenwashing. Truly care about it and build it into your DNA. Yes.
I have a question about that. I'm glad you said something in that marketing vein. We're in that space, but we have an ESG client, and so I've heard a little bit about greenwashing and all this kind of stuff that tends to happen in the industry. I've heard a little bit about a B Corp, and what does that really mean? And is that growing as a place for businesses to drive towards being a more sustainable business, and or does that have much clout in the industry or not?
Yeah, I will answer that because I have a little bit of exposure around that. So B Corp is a third-party organization that certifies other businesses on their environmental practices, social practices, basically ESG values. They have pretty strict standards actually, and you have to be like an incorporated business and that kind of stuff. They will do an audit. Like, it's a pretty rigorous process, and I've known small businesses that have gone through it and other businesses that have been approved for it. Does it have clout? I would say for the consumer that cares about ESG, yes. I personally, when I shop and if I see that there's a company that has a P Corp certificate, I will gravitate towards that company because it's a seal of approval that this company is.
That they subscribe to these same, practices that are so important.
Yes,
already.
yeah, and it doesn't mean that they're perfect.
Yeah.
Like Dan said, there's no perfection. Is you do what you can and you keep improving in that industry. But B Corp has certain standards that you have to hit before they give you a certificate. So it for a company that is truly on that path of being a sustainable company, a B Corp certification really makes sense. Yes.
And we use things in the hotel industry like LEED certified building, so
Right.
there's like a set criteria of doing it that is not, some random thing. But when you say greenwashing, I just thought of the hotel industry was infamous for greenwashing back about 20 years ago, that when they said, we're gonna wash your sheets every 3 days to help our environment. They did not care about the environment. It was totally a cost savings initiative. It was total greenwashing, and so whenever I see those signs, I just kind of laugh because it's not authentic.
Right.
And I'll just share based on, I've been working in professional sports now for about 7 years, and I've had the privilege of working at 2 stadiums that operated on 2 totally different paradigms, especially in this matter. Working for AT&T Stadium, it was a different type of vibe because it wasn't about necessarily environment. They didn't raise environmental awareness as far as how that stadium is operated. But when I worked for the San Francisco 49ers, they catered a lot of that building and that stadium to Silicon Valley. And that's a melting pot of different cultures and customs. So environmental awareness and environmental safety and environmental governance and social environmental governance was always key components that were built into the stadium. So when I look at the notes like recycling processes, when you walk through Levi Stadium, you will see 3 or 4 different forms of waste disposals, whether it's for trash, whether it's for bottles, whether it's for a different form of plastics. They made it, for the point that I was hearing from both speakers is the awareness. You can't get it perfect, but you have to make sure that people around are aware. Whatever they see, what they're going to gravitate to. So even the visual aesthetics of saying, okay, even though I don't have a water bottle in my hands, I see that they are making an emphasis to address that this is an issue that we as people have to bring awareness and raise awareness on. And so I believe, from the stadium perspective and how these, you got 50 to 80,000 fans coming into a game on a Sunday. There's a lot of waste that's going to take place whether you're in a suite or whether you're in a seat. And so having those locations, and they had them all around the stadium. It wasn't just in one main location. They made it their business. Anywhere you went, you saw these waste and disposals, and even like how they did their electricity generation. They had charging ports where everybody can come to one location, plug in right there on the spot, charge their phones, and it was all kind of running, operating, and it was built in the building. They had their own greenhouse at the top of the stadium, so they grew their own vegetation for their restaurants. And so they kind of adopted a lot of these different models that Silicon Valley and that entire region was already moving towards, and this was back in 2016. So.
Wow, that's incredible.
I'm actually from San Diego, and we actually have a council, a Fair Green Council, that any company can go through to be certified, and they actually will come out and help you on board. The whole process is fairly easy, but it is a little rigorous, but it's easy in working with them, but yeah.
It's all about the awareness. What you don't know, what you don't know.
Let's go ahead and take this question, and then we'll move on to the governance aspect for time's sake.
I know there have been a lot of talks within the SEC to impose those tax or the carbon credits, but I know there's a lot of internal practices that can be made. But what about external offsetting? What do y'all think about that? And like, what are some good practices outside besides internal practices that are very beneficial, like planting trees? I don't know if there's any other methods.
So,
No, go ahead.
With the Dallas Mavericks, we had this community program that we used to do called Trees for Threes. And so based on how many 3-pointers the Dallas Mavericks hit throughout that entire season, during the summertime, we would go plant that many trees within a
We
specific
need
area.
Steph Curry then.
So Trees for Threes was definitely like one way of us kind of raising some environmental awareness and doing that on the NBA side. You hope that other teams adopt.
Is there anything else besides trees? Because I know that's like the main method, but do y'all know of any other methods
There's
off the top of your head?
Great, if you look at my former company, SH Hotels and Resorts, it was the first carbon neutral hotel company in the United States. And they did carbon offsets, so they have where all of the stuff goes. And what's really cool is as a guest to the hotel, you can actually, the loyalty points that you earn as a guest, you can actually put towards carbon offprint, so your own, you can be carbon neutral as a person by participating in it. So there's a bunch of resources on there of what's available, and what they do. I think a part of it's planting trees, but there's a whole bunch of other initiatives.
I'll just add something really short to that. So offsetting our negative environmental impacts, it's better than nothing. But I would say that should be the last resort, meaning the first solutions you wanna go to are truly to reduce the environmental impact and not use that as a crutch to say, I'm just gonna keep polluting as much as I want and then buy carbon offsets, right? So buying carbon offsets is things like giving money or investing in things that create, for example, oxygen and like planting trees or giving to organizations that work in environmental conservation. That, if not done right, so let's say, as an example, ExxonMobil, they buy carbon offsets, but they use it as a way to keep polluting and producing and as much, damaging fuel and extracting. So like, that to me, as a consumer, I would say that's greenwashing because you're just using that as a crutch to make yourself look a little bit better, but you still have all the oil stains on your face. So that as a last resort, yes. So for example, when we ship things, we have to use carbon footprint. There is a carbon footprint. You can use carbon offsets to try to mitigate that, yes, because there's no getting around shipping things. Like from getting from one thing from A to B, you have to use energy and all that, right? But not as a substitute for truly reducing your impact on the world. Yeah.
It's just real quick on that. It's the same thing with ocean plastics, right? There's a great company called One Ocean that does these bracelets, which is fantastic. I applaud it. For every $1 or $1 you spend, they take out 1 pound of, which is great. But it's like 0.0000001% of the plastic that's actually going in the ocean. And so you need to stop the spigot, the stuff going in versus trying to get like, okay, it's great. I don't mean to downplay it's not a great organization, but it's such a minuscule impact of what's going in. To your point, if you put the energy on like, let's not put it in there in the first place, would make a huge difference.
Totally, I agree.
And just to jump in on that a little bit, I agree with what everyone said. I think it's important to realize that the best way is to reduce the amount of footprint you're creating in the first place, right? But in the interim, we have to do something, and the offsets it's a great market kind of making thing that takes place, but one of the downsides and some of the terms being used are the additionality and the permanence. So when planting trees, for example, you'll see in the media there's some negative press because someone may have purchased an offset and someone with the forest has agreed to not use that plot of land for the trees to cut them down and make paper products, but sometimes the land gets sold or there's a fire that takes place and the trees get burned anyway. And so now how good was that offset you purchased 2, 3, 5 years ago? And so there's some concerns around that. There's some companies out there, Charm Industrial, they're actually direct air capture technology. They capture the carbon out of the air and put it back into the ground. That's one other solution. And there's a company that we partner with. They're actually, they seed phytoplanktons in the water near where agricultural runoff is taking place. So rather than shut down industry up the Mississippi River, they say, okay, let the industry continue. And when the runoff happens near the delta, we can counterbalance the biodiversity that once existed, and they put it back to normal where the plants grow, they create, they eat carbon dioxide to create oxygen, and the fish can eat the plants, and there's a capturing element to the carbon dioxide that occurs that way too. So there are plenty of different offsets available at higher and different levels of quality that I think is an important thing to consider when you're looking at doing the offsets. So.
But while we're still on environment, does anyone want to weigh in on cap and trades? We talked about pollution. Does anyone want to kind of weigh in on their thoughts on that process before we go to governance?
On what process?
On cap and trade.
Oh, cap and trade.
Mm-hmm. Are y'all familiar? Anyone familiar with that? Otter?
Educate us, brother.
Right.
I'm the expert. The panelists here are the experts. But essentially, from what I know, it is a right to pollute, right? So like, it's basically putting pollution into the market, right? Now it's in the marketplace, right? So now, in order for an organization to pollute, they have to pay a premium or pay a price. And you can buy or trade or sell that right to another organization for them to do it. So let's just say, like, for example, a hotel didn't have to use as much pollution or much plastic that month or that quarter. They can then sell that right to another organization who has, overused their right to pollute. So what are your all thoughts on that concept?
Sounds almost like lobbying.
So I think all those negative impacts and you price it into the product, we would be paying very different prices for the services and things that we use. So given the imperfect system, cap and trade is a way to introduce into this system it's a way to introduce a capitalist incentive for companies to pollute less and be able to barter, basically trade, if they are good actors. So it's a solution, but I think there are better solutions. For example, plastic is incredibly cheap because it has become incredibly cheap to, plastic is made from oil, by the way. So it's very cheap for companies to dig for oil or frack for fossil fuels and then make the plastic. The process has become so cheap. If you, for example, price in those negative externalities of disturbing the ground, of all the contamination that comes from extracting fossil fuels, of all the price of having to deal with plastic waste, if you price all that in, plastic would not be that cheap. And then naturally, in the capitalist system, companies would move away from using so much plastic and use other materials that then are cost efficient for them. The reason why we're inundated by plastic, and like Dan said, a lot of generations still living today grew up in a time when plastic was not the norm. It was glass, it was paper, it was whatever, right? The reason why plastic has become inundated our world is because it's become so incredibly cheap. If we tax it, for example, the way that you say we tax alcohol or cigarettes, because they're just as harmful, if not more harmful for the environment and our health, that incentive, the taxing incentive, would change the way that businesses operate. So cap and trade is a tool, I think is a very imperfect tool. Again, I think it's slightly better than nothing, but I think there are better ways to incentivize or disincentivize businesses to act better.
Absolutely.
There's two great documentaries. One's called Plastic China. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of it's really terrifying because for years and years, China bought all of our plastic, and then they would, repurpose it and then sell the plastic beads back to us. But there was entire communities that were built just like 20 feet tall for acres and acres and acres of plastic people living in those communities. The president of China saw the documentary and stopped imports of plastic into China. All of that plastic is now in our recycling system, and we don't have a way to process it. So a really great documentary to take a look at. It changed the world dynamics, that documentary.
Where is it found, on Netflix?
Yeah, I think you can get it on Netflix. It's called Plastic China.
I think there's a good 60 minutes on it too.
Yeah.
Because then the plastic started going to Vietnam, right? And then and then we didn't do it in Vietnam either.
Correct.
Something.
So other countries are starting to take saying, hey, we don't want that stuff either. So you're right, it's really cheap to produce, but it's impossible to get rid of.
I love it. I love that these are everyday resources that we can tap into and within our organizations and within our personal lives. So fabulous answers on those. Let's go ahead and jump into the governance aspect, since that was the #2 highest ranked of what you guys wanted to hear about, because we are quickly running out of time. And so this is directed towards anyone. Chris, I figure you may have an answer for this. How do you keep stakeholders informed and engaged?
That's a good one. And it does depend on, as many of these answers will be, the type of business that you're talking about. But I think one of my fellow panelists brought up earlier too, it's important to weave into the fabric of the business, into the mission, the vision, the values, these sorts of things. And that way they do permeate in the right ways. And obviously measure what matters. And so developing OKRs or KPIs around certain things that the people, the employees of your firm, or the customers, or your partners, the communities they want, to have those be a part of the thing that you provide. And weave that into, some companies look at, they've got like a product mission, maybe a financial mission, and then maybe a social or ESG type mission. And if you can put things around each of those and in balance and do them the right way, then I think you can be successful in incorporating these governing policies into your business and executing on them. An interesting one that was brought up is the B Corp. That's one attempt to do that, right? Because now these companies, they do have to file into their incorporation documents certain governing things that where, rather than just like short-term profit only, they are holding themselves accountable on a fiduciary level to these other things, including external stakeholders and so on. And so I think that's a good signal in one thing. It just doesn't guarantee necessarily. I think if you're going to call out, companies have to be authentic, or else customers, employees are going to see through that. So you have to say what you're going to do, and you have to do it.
I'll piggyback on that because with the Dallas Mavericks, that has been something that has consistently been addressed, specifically with the American Airlines Center. How can we continue to make that building more eco-friendly and ESG-friendly for our consumers and fans that come into the space? And so I think that the Dallas Mavericks, the American Airlines Center, and the Dallas Stars, they do a great job of continuing to collaborate and talk with our local councilmen, talking with County Judge Clay Jenkins, consistently working with Dallas ISD, working with all of the nonprofit communities that we do business with, and trying to working together and collaborating as a team, pulling all the resources that we have to figure out how can we collectively solve these problems, because what you'll start to notice is that everybody in each one of their lanes may not fully see the full picture. They only see it from the lens that they're in. So it's sometimes important for us to have multiple different sets of eyes from different spaces to sit down and discuss these problems. Whether you agree or disagree, it's good to have all things known. And once all things are known, they're made clear, then you can come towards some positive working solutions to find and address those socioeconomic challenges, environmental challenges, and practically anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone said it, but I think, the more authentic you are as a brand and what you set out on. And I think if I was you guys looking at a startup, I use the example of my former company had bought one hotel, South Beach. So they bought the Gansevoort Hotel. Barry Sternlicht, the founder, had this vision of creating a more sustainable, the first sustainable, scalable hotel brand. And so he bought this, kind of worn down Gansevoort Hotel, $250 million. He put about $100 million into the renovation for $350 million. It sold 3 years ago to Host for $620 million. So by staying true to what you believe in, so the renovation, not one tree was cut down for the renovation of the hotel. Everything was done through a sustainable lens of how can we do this in the most sustainable fashion possible. So, I agree with what you were saying, that the minute that they stray away from that brand is dead, right? The minute that they put some, rubber flooring in one of their places, or the, fake wood floors, they're done. Because the whole concept, the whole thing was built on sustainability. So it's great, but the governance part is like, if this is what you're putting out to the world, if this is who you are, you better stay true to it, or your company's gonna pay the dividends big time.
Yeah, so reminding you all, governance is how you run your organization. So for you all panelists, why is it important to have not only a diverse organization, but also a diverse board?
I believe every opinion matters. Whether you agree or disagree with it, it still matters. And the moment you start disagreeing on an opinion, you're essentially eliminating people's First Amendment right. And I think everybody kind of comes from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and so you kind of have to pinpoint how do all of these things coexist together, because they can't live separate, because then that's segregation. And so when you're building governance starts with kind of you need women at the table, you need young men, young women, you need, anybody that pays taxes in this country, you need to have them at the table. And because if you're paying taxes, that you believe in the main cause, and that's to make sure that this place we call America can be sustainable through and through. And so when you're governing and making decisions, and you're building documents and doctrines to figure out how you want to make businesses sustainable, or how you want to make them, open for all, you kind of have to have everybody at the table. And I believe that was what the experiences in San Francisco taught me, because when you think about companies like Facebook, Cisco, Dell, Symantec, a lot of these major tech powerhouse companies, they have people from every part of the world there, and so they have to make sure that they're catering not only the business structure, but also the city governance has to almost cater to how their lives and their cultures and their norms are. That's why you'll see 3 or 4 different businesses and restaurants and retail stores and nail and hair salon shops. You'll see a little bit of everything living in these spaces, because the city understands, like, these are the people who are spending money, they're consumers, so we have to at least open our ears, even though we may not be able to do everything. We have to at least figure out, as a collective unit, how can we piece some of these things together to create a more unified society and country.
I think the other thing with it is, you know, the employees in your company want to be able to look up and see people that look like them. You know, and so, you know, just personally, when I joined Make Ready, I looked and there was our Chief Operating Officer, Christine, and then the rest of the executive team is a bunch of white men, right? And I said, listen, I probably wouldn't have hired me. You know, I know me and what I can bring to the table, but knowing that I was bringing another white middle-aged man perspective to the table didn't add value. So, you know, I think, you know, for the governance part, it's about having your boards and your exec teams reflective of the communities and the employees that they serve.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know in the hotel industry, there's not a bunch of old white men doing it, right?
Yeah.
And if I could speak on your behalf, I used to work at the Dolphins Hotel, so I'm familiar with Make Ready, and what he's saying is very much so true. They believe in a diverse ecosystem there as well from the governance perspective, and I've been able to develop as a young man as far as opening my perspectives and not just having one tunnel of vision in life. So I can applaud what he's saying because I was once a part of Make Ready as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to hear from the
Yeah.
outside. All right, let's jump into our
And
next.
just the last thing with that is, Josh will tell you, so we partner with Josh on some of our cultural initiatives, and he'll tell you, when you get around governance, I think it's about being crystal clear of what your goals are and being able to measure those goals. So Josh and I went back and forth for a little bit, that Josh works on our culture council, and I really challenged him of like this, you know, what was a 5% increase in diverse recruiting? And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Right? And so we went back and forth of saying like, all right, how do we benchmark that? So are we and so we actually, through that dialogue and through challenging it, said, no, we want a 5% increase in diverse leadership in our company. That I can measure, that I can put systems together for, that we can do. And so I think with that governance piece is really about being crystal clear of what the goals are and how you're gonna get there. Because to your point earlier, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Right.
And so being really crystal clear on that.
If I may add something, there's kind of two things I wanna touch on, but one of the things is like I've sat there in corporate. I'm a student, that's why, and I'm studying sustainability, so that's why I'm here. But and so I've sat there and heard like recruiters, like VPs of recruitment say, okay, as long as the person is somewhere where there's good internet reception, right? Because it's a part of their diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, they can work for us. But then there's also like weird things where it's like, well, not as much, it has to be in this way. And so it's like you hear, and even on LinkedIn, like you go and you see jobs that are like remote US, but they want you to live somewhere specific. And so I think that like me, when I was like in that environment, I was an intern, right? So like this is my first look at how I could potentially use my grad degree. And you're telling us like, as long as you can work and like, as long as you have good internet reception, you can work anywhere. Like maybe she didn't realize an intern was gonna be in that audit, but then like you move away and then you hear other interns aren't able to continue because they want them to be in this specific city and they gotta go back to their school, even if they do it part-time. So it's like, you know, part of it is, yeah, say it, but then also make sure you know everyone who's listening and you actually follow through, because that can harm your reputation further down the line. Because, you know, students talk, we talk about our experiences, and people are gonna hear, like, they're saying one thing, I had a great experience while there, but, you know, maybe this person wanted to continue and they couldn't because, and they can't really say anything because then it seems like they're trying to, like, cause problems. And then the final thing I wanted to say about the whole green buildings. So in Hawaii, there's this area called Ward Village. And so this is kind of like how a community, like different people can come together and make something happen instead of it being on one developer's reputation. It's the first completely green, like
neighborhood in the United States. So all of the buildings that are in that neighborhood are LEED certified platinum and all that. So that's kind of like a way that people can get into hospitality and green hospitality without it being solely on their hotel group brand.
That's great.
Trey, you wanna touch on that?
I was gonna touch on the first part that she said. I remember when St. Marshall joined our organization as the first Black president and CEO of an NBA organization, period. But to your point, she had a 90-day plan that she built out, and in that 90-day plan, the biggest piece that they wanted to address was the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece of the Dallas Mavericks. And so part of that 90-day plan, she really came in and infiltrated and was able to actually complete all of our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals within that 90-day period, where we saw a shift from 10 to 15% of minority management to about 45% within the first 2 years. And that was also women executive leadership. So when you looked at our paradigm, you had St. Marshall, you had Tarsha McClure, who's now our chief of people. We had Sekou Lewis, who is now our general counsel. Theo Hodges, who's our vice president of ticket sales and service. But then you also see like Ryan Mackey, who runs all of our corporate partnerships and sponsorships. You say Iris Diaz, who runs our marketing department. So you kind of started to see a huge shift in our executive leadership just within that 90-day period. And it gives a lot of us young professionals who are trying to reach those heights, it gave us an idea to say like, wow, this actually is possible. You just kind of have to put a plan together and stick to it. So, I've kind of had the blessing to be a part of an experience like that where we saw a huge cultural shift when, you thought that everything was going downhill with an investigation. She came in and just lifted and changed the entire paradigm just by sticking to her plan. So,
I love that. I love it. Let's go ahead and switch into the social side since we have about 5 minutes left. And then again, this is targeted at anyone. Trey, I figure you may have an answer within this.
Okay.
I was trying to pinpoint some questions for all of our for all of our panelists here. Okay, one benefit to boosting employee experience and engagement could be events or activations within the community. In what ways have you seen events or activations help organizations?
Yeah, to make that real quick since we have 5 minutes. In my professional career, working in professional sports, every single one of my jobs is tailored towards creating experiences. It never mattered whether the football teams won or lost games. It didn't matter about a basketball touching the floor. Everything that I've done in my professional career has been around making sure that people, whether you're in the corporate sectors, whether you're in schools, whether you're in nonprofits, whether you're just a pedestrian, my job was to make sure that I create a memorable experience for you. So in special events, we're catering these to companies and people who want to utilize this stadium as a drawing for team building, employee morale, holiday gatherings, and social parties. When I was working at Levi Stadium, we focused on team building experiences because with such large tech industries and tech, companies, they're filtering in interns every quarter almost, and so they had to make sure that they were doing team building experiences so that way they can identify who their strong leaders are versus who needs some improvement versus who's introverted, extroverted. Now what I do as a corporate social responsibility manager, my job is solely to create programs that address real issues in our world. Last week I did a all-day, two-day girls coding camp where we're teaching girls how to code and how to build video games and how to build virtual worlds. I did a 300-person Dallas hybrid prep back-to-school kickoff where we are introducing these hybrid prep is the future of education. They do 3 days in, 2 days in a metaverse-based teaching where the teachers and avatar, the students are avatars, and they're adjusting their education module based on how our work life is now. We work from home, we work in offices, sometimes I'm at a coffee shop, and so they're making sure that the children can also have that accessibility to the parents. But you don't know that unless somebody's creating the programs to raise awareness to that school and it exists. So a lot of my job now tailors towards creating programs to address a lot of the socioeconomic issues and where the future of education, the future of jobs are going in the tech, AI, VR, metaverse, corporate world. I'm just trying to bring awareness to all of those initiatives.
Amazing. All right, to piggyback off of that, you said programs that you guys are creating. What tools do you all think organizations need to be in place to build a sustainable and resilient culture?
Bolt.
There you go, we're waiting for that answer.
This is too easy.
And what other tools, like communication tools, or what other assets you feel like organizations may need in order to measure that engagement, track metrics, or give you your green card, if you will?
I think some platforms where people can find you quickly. like, I know one, Discord is a huge platform in the esports industry that they use to kind of set up their gaming tournaments. They set up, when they built their communities, they'll put like, hey, this is my social post. Can you guys go in there and reach, likes, clicks, share, subscribe, so that way they can continue to boost the social amplification numbers. Well, Discord can also be used as a resourceful tool if you're a company and you want to connect with your people. You can use Discord and build your own Discord community of people who don't work for you, but you can get their information and track that data. Whenever you're putting any information from your social media accounts, you can use Discord as a tool to say, hey, guys, this is what we've dropped. Here's a new launch. Here's a new ad. Here's a newsletter, and now you kind of organically sharing information with your community so they feel that they are a part of what you're trying to build, what you're trying to create. They feel that their opinion actually matters. The younger generation, they use these tools for gaming and for entertainment purposes, but for corporate America and for companies, small companies that are trying to organically get into guerrilla marketing but do it more grassroots, you can use an app like Discord as a social media tool to continue to communicate with people who don't even work in your company, but you can learn and get the insights because they're still living in the world.
Did you say Discord?
Discord, DISCORD.
Oh, Discord, yeah, Discord,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Since we're based off of the culture topic right now, I'm gonna ask this one. It's actually a two-part question. So how do you create the right culture and mindset to engage your people and reinforce the right behaviors?
I think the whole thing starts with the hiring process. Let me take it back even further. It starts with what your vision is, and then getting people who are aligned with that vision. I think when companies find themselves 10 years old and now we're gonna do a team building, it's such, it's too late, really. Yeah, it's a little too late. You kind of missed the boat on that one. But what's the vision, and then how do you attract people that kind of believe in the same thing? And what I had gone through with so, like I said, my former company, One Hotels SH, was really all about environmentalism and social responsibility and sustainability. And then after George Floyd was murdered, it's well, do we change our focus? And what we did is we partnered with a company called Intersectional Environmentalists. And we most people know that the communities that are most impacted by sustainability and pollution are communities of color, right? So we thought this is how we can reinforce who we are through Intersectional Environmentalists. And there's an amazing girl, the Green Girl Leah, if you're on Instagram, who really talks about how that, the intersection between the social part and the environmental part, that they're not two different things, that they're combined.
I think I would draw upon my experience working for a big corporation in the U.S. before becoming a small business owner. It's not a full answer to your question, but this company was trying to implement sustainable practices inside the organization as well as outside, for the consumer. But what I felt was really lacking, other than hiring people that are aligned, but because this company already existed for a long time, so they're kind of starting picking it up in the middle and say, we're going to be sustainable after being in business for 100 years, which, granted, 100 years ago, sustainability was not a concept that people thought about in the same way. But I really saw a lack in leadership. I feel like a company that truly wants to permeate the culture with sustainable practices, it has to start from the top. It has to start from your executives, from the CEO, and not just the sustainability and community manager, which is what this company was doing. So it was this one little 3-person team in a 10,000 people company pushing these initiatives and trying to change behavior, and it was really, pushing a ball against the, rolling up the hill. And the CEO didn't talk about it. It wasn't in the earnings call. Nobody's compensation was tied to it. It was, once in a while they sent out an email blast saying, we have this initiative, but it was just very lukewarm kind of effort. So I think it starts with who you hire, but also it's modeled by leadership.
That
That's great.
was a
Just
good question, because we're familiar with this, with what we do, but the ESG consultant that we works with pretty large commercial real estate, clients, and interestingly, that they're on different coasts than we are. In the Dallas area, there seems to be a lack of desire, or knowledge, or something. We're such a, there's so much rich commerce here in Dallas, but there's not the resources, interest, the push and the drive for some of these CEOs and executives from what, I mean, and I only see it through this lens that I lived through, but when you're talking about this, it's systemic, and we've, you know, and you see these other places in our country and in the world who are picking this up because they desire to facilitate and lead this change on all these fronts. But there seems to be a lack of it here in Dallas. And what, I mean, where are the resources and what do we do to get our Dallas-based organizations and leadership to really subscribe to these philosophies and really start trying to drive that forward so it becomes more top of mind for, you know, everyone here in this community, in the DFW community?
Well, I think the big thing is changing the mindset that, you know, if you're, you know, Democrat, Republican thing of like, I tell people I'm conservative. I conserve water. I conserve plastic.
That's great. I love that.
You know, so, but it's kind of, you know, I think that's the whole idea of like, you know, getting the politics and all of the BS out of it.
Right.
You know, that it's just about like doing, you know,
Doing the right thing.
Do the right thing,
Yeah.
I always take
Spike
the
Lee
middle
victory.
party, the middle party of the two, which they'll never agree on, is God. And if you're a true believer, it's that simple, you know, and part of taking care of this world and our environment was part of our duty to our Father. So I don't want to go into my whole preacher sermon, but I will. But I will.
It benefits all of us, and I think we've been able to learn so much about this, but we've seen it through the lens of these big organizations, kind of like what you're describing, but they're on either coast, and our company, our client is based here in Dallas, and there's very few competitors of what she does, and it makes me wonder, why isn't there more energy, the term, but you know, an effort here for people in Dallas to start going and consulting to these businesses to help them facilitate some of this
But
stuff.
that gives your customer a competitive advantage, right?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely,
Yeah.
and she's in a whole nother stratosphere, so she's working with big clients. I'm
And-
talking
and
about even if
sometimes-
it's mid-tier companies here in Dallas that are, you know.
Well, I think we have both, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
these are the companies that are affecting change in our
Yeah.
area.
I think it's a mindset of what I started to say a minute ago is that, you know, 10 years ago it was like the hippie tree hugger that was concerned about the environment.
Granola, yeah.
You know, but you know, when you take a look at Barry Sternlicht, who I mentioned earlier, you know, staunch Republican, you know, super, you know, runs a $95 billion Starwood Capital fund. However, he saw the business strategy of building the first scalable, sustainable hotel brand has made him billions of dollars. And so I think when people can change the mindset, it's not, you know, Barry's not some hippie tree hugger guy. It's a business strategy. And I think for people in conservative communities to understand that can go into your business strategy, that it's not two separate things. Barry always says he wanted people to know that they could live well and they could live green at the same time, that they weren't mutually exclusive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, to you guys' point before you asked the last question. Well, first off, what company are you guys with?
We're with a marketing agency, but our client is she's an ESG consultant in the commercial real estate sector.
Okay.
And so her clients are the biggest ones you've ever heard, and they're big financial institutions in property management throughout the country and even into Asia and Europe. So, you know, so we've been able to look through that lens of commercial real estate and all of the different property management that therefore is affected by these. We work with a lot of GRI standards. We know all some of this kind of stuff that you guys are talking about, but it has made me wonder, and it's made me hungry for seeing some of this in our own community in Dallas.
Yeah.
And you just don't see a lot of the people who are really, and I think it is, you know, to your point, unfortunately, it's a little political, but it just seems like the environment is right for these leaders to start to, you know, facilitate some of these changes, and they need someone to guide them through that process and help them understand the bottom line and where it is that they're gonna make money, not retention and for employees, but it also does all this other good in their buildings for the long term. And we just don't see a whole lot of other people in DFW who are doing what she's
Yeah.
doing.
Dallas
It's
is
a shame.
actually ranked last in as far as, in all,
I can
ESG
see that. I
inclusion in
can see that.
2018. There's an article in Dallas Innovates or Dallas Observer, one of those. And that's actually what inspired us to
It is.
Well,
you know,
and I
Observer.
think
Yeah, it was Observer.
it proves the point looking at the attendance in this room.
Right.
I mean, I can sit here and ask y'all questions all afternoon. I know y'all probably have things to do, but, you know, it is something that's just sorely missed in this community and with with Jerry Jones and with the big people that are making big decisions and lots of, you know, board meetings around Dallas, and it's just a shame.
It's like the
Yeah.
sustainability.
Yeah, right.
They make it all arbitrary culture, but it really does, you know, it really does mean a lot, for sure. But we have one last question for the panelists. So we're talking about impact, social impact panel, obviously. What impact do you all want to leave on the world before you go? Starting with you, and we'll just work our way down.
Oh man, that's a deep one. Very,
Deep one.
very profound.
Yeah.
I'll do my best here, and I think it probably is embodied in the things I'm doing today, which is my, not a plug, but Clear is the company that I operate. It is designed to help other companies become more sustainable. And so part of what we do is addressing the entire question that I think we were just discussing for the last 5 minutes, which is how do we explain to companies that addressing ESG and thinking about sustainability, that is a value creation mechanism. Identifying risk to your business and growth opportunities, how is that a thing that's going to be harmful to your business? And for you to actually be truly sustainable as a business and create long-term enterprise value, you have to address these things. Lower cost of capital, lower cost of customers, lower cost of talent, revenue opportunities, operational efficiencies. There's too many things that fall under ESG, and that's part of what we're doing. So my goal would be to help businesses become more aware and incorporate these things more into their businesses to make the world more sustainable. That's the only way that capitalism and humanity and the planet, we're all going to survive.
I think with me, you know, I really, you know, hold my legacy is that I've helped put a ding in the hotel industry into a more sustainable model. You know, to steal Steve Jobs' quote, that, you know, when you look at our 8 little hotels that, you know, produce, you know, 2 million pieces of plastic. So if I can change that, you know, I changed that with my last company, if I can change it with this company, and if other companies can kind of follow that trajectory, you know, to say that I was a part of eliminating 200 million pieces of plastic in the world, I think that would be a pretty cool legacy.
It's a big
to have.
impact
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah.
I think mine is very similar to Dan. So my business, Useful, is actually the first refill and zero waste shop in Dallas. And I started it because I didn't find it here. That's why I said your customer has a great competitive advantage, because there's not a whole lot of competition. So in a way, being in Dallas and not having as many sustainable businesses, for me, it turned out to be an opportunity. And I've quit my corporate job, and I'm doing this full time. So my legacy is to build out this refiller and zero waste store in the DFW area, and helping, like Dan, he helps hotels, you know, from a business perspective. I'm helping individuals reduce their plastic waste and encouraging reuse and helping consumers think about what they're using instead of just buying another bottle, another plastic sponge, whatever it is. So I would like that to be my legacy, that I put a little dent in helping people reuse and refill.
You know what, Adriana, I can brag on you right now. First time I had a conversation with Adriana, she convinced me to go, you don't even know it, convinced me to go buy a water dispenser, and immediately that day I bought a water dispenser.
Oh, wow.
Just based off of our conversation.
There you go. That's
so you're
amazing.
already,
Yeah, thank
you're already
thank
making
you
it
very
hard.
much. Yes, and it's actually these little things that add up. It seems small, like, oh, she did this one thing, and, you know, she's not gonna buy another, you know, 10 water bottles, whatever it is, but it adds up in
Oh, yeah.
you know, lifetime of 60
Definitely.
years. And then you do it, and maybe you tell your neighbor and your friend and your, you know, a brother or sister. And that's how we create change. It truly is one person to the next. And yes, we need systemic change, but that also doesn't happen if you don't have people on the ground doing it.
Right.
Sorry,
Right.
just one thing I wanted to comment of what you said. Sorry, I'm jumping in, we're over time here, but you had said that, you know, the true change starts with leadership. And I would say the culture starts with leadership, but the best ideas are never from leadership. And so, you know, I worked at I did all of the concessions inside the Grand Teton National Park. Actually lived in the park for a year and a half. And we had a room attendant who said, we're inside the national park, why do we have this bottled water in here? And she said, this was at the Jenny Lake Lodge, little Grand Teton National Park, Jenny Lake Lodge. And she said, you know, we should just put a water refilling station here and just give people stuff so when they go on hikes. Well, the US Park Service came in and saw that we were no longer doing plastic bottles. They eliminated throughout the National Park Service the entire system.
Wow.
That started with our room attendant who had a great idea, which she saw water bottles in the trash can.
Love
And
it.
so, you know, we were responsible for creating that culture for that to thrive and exist, where she could have a feeling and have say and feel like someone was gonna listen. But that idea, like, I couldn't take credit for, we couldn't take credit for, we're just creating a culture for that to exist, so.
I love that. Very good.
That's amazing. And I'll say for me, because I'm always blessed to never be the smartest guy in the room, and I'm always okay with that. And my gift has always been the gift of connectedness and raising awareness. So the way I would like to continue to put impact on the world, specifically with ESG, is just to continue to collaborate and create events with amazing individuals like these to continue to raise that awareness, so we can continue to work within school districts, work within nonprofits, work within our communities, and within the Dallas Mavericks mantra, to continue to raise awareness on why we need to continue to focus on ESG and prioritize ESG. So it would just continue to use my gifts of connectedness and creativity to put together programs that continue to raise more awareness on this, because it is key and it's important for us to have a more sustainable future. My kids are 5 and 2. I definitely want them to have a long, sustainable life. So we kind of have to be a part of that now.
I love it. Well, thank you guys all so much for joining us. Can we give a round of applause?